I've been walking the razor's edge. I cut my feet again. Now I can't stand on my own. I wish that I could be the truth you are to me, but I've been cold as a stone. And even though I lost my way, you still got an open hand to hold. I really can't go on acting this way. Can you help me find my way home? Can't stand the thought of being alone. Trying to find my way to get on my feet again, but lately it seems hopeless. I feel like I've been mistreated, wound up feeling cheated, because I've been so careless. But ever since you came my way, I felt a spark of a chance to hold. I'll take your hand if you guide my way. Jesus, help me find my way home. Help me find my way home. And you say you'll stay at my side. I no longer have the need to hide. If I could only let go of my pride, I could see how you help my fear subside. How will I ever thank you for all the things that you do and giving me the chance to walk with you hand in hand, to let my sadness in. Please keep my heart in your hands. I hope that I can give to you the selfless love that you have sown. The seeds of love will grow straight and true, 'cause you help me find my way home. Thank you, Lord, I am home. Help me find my way feeling broken, barely holding on. But there's just something so strong somewhere inside of me, and I am down, but I'll get up again. Don't count me out just yet. I've been brought down to my knees, and I've been pushed way past the point of breaking, but I can't take it. I'll be back on my feet. This is far from over. You haven't seen the last of me. You haven't seen the last of me. They can't say that I won't stay around, but I'm gonna stand my ground. You're not gonna stop me. You don't know me, you don't know who I am. Don't count me out so fast. I've been brought down to my knees, and I've been pushed way past the point of breaking, but I can't take it. I'll be back on my feet. This is far from over. You haven't seen the last of me. There will be no fade out. This is not the end. I'm down now, but I'll be standing tall again. Times are hard, but I was built tough. I'm gonna show you all what I'm made of. I've been brought down to my knees, and I've been pushed way past the point of breaking, but I can't take it. I'll be back on my feet. This is far from over. I am far from over. You haven't seen the last of me. Oh, you haven't seen the last of me. When life is cut too deep and left you hurting, and the future you had hoped for is now burning, and the dreams you held so tight lost their meaning, and you don't know if you'll ever find the healing. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it, and the night can only last for so long. Whatever you're facing, your heart is breaking. There's a promise for the ones who just hold on. Lift up your eyes and see. The sun is rising. The sun is rising. The sun is rising. The sun is rising. Every high and every low you're gonna go through. You don't have to be afraid. I am with you. I am with you. In the moment you're so weak, you feel like stopping. Let the hope you have light the road you're walking. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it. And the night can only last for so long. Whatever you're facing, your heart is breaking. There's a promise for the ones who just hold to the mountain, because you asked me to. Up over the clouds to where the sky was blue, and I could see all around me, everywhere, and I could see all around me, everywhere. And sometimes it feels like I've never been nothing but tired, and I keep on walking till the day I expire. Some days I just lay down, no more can I do, and then I just go on again, because you asked me to. And some days I look down, afraid I will fall, and though the sun shines, I see nothing at all, and then I hear your sweet voice coming and go, telling me softly that you love me so.
Check, check. 1, 2, 1.
The peaceful valley over the mountain, the peaceful valley. If you can go, I may never get there ever in this lifetime, but sooner or later, there I will go. Sooner or later, it's there I will go. I'd have stayed there forever if not for your touch. Oh, but you move me out of myself and into the fire. You move me burning with love and with hope and desire. How you move me. You go whistling in the dark, making light of it, making light of it. And I follow with my heart, laughing all the way. Oh, because you move me. You get me dancing and you make me sing. You move me. Now I'm taking delight in every little thing. How you out of myself and into the fire, burning with love and with hope and desire. How you move me. How you move me. Oh. When the rain is blowing in your face and the whole world is on your case, I could offer you a warm embrace to make you feel my love. When the evening shadows and the stars appear and there is no one there to dry your tears, I could hold you for 1,000,000 years to make you feel my love. I know you haven't made your mind up yet, but I would never do you wrong. I've known it from the moment that we met. No doubt in my mind where you belong. I go hungry, I go black and blue. I go crawling down the avenue. No, there's nothing that I wouldn't do to make you feel my love. The storms are raging on the rolling sea and on the highway of regret. breeze are blowing wild and free. You ain't seen nothing like me yet. I could make you happy, make your dreams come true. Nothing that I wouldn't do. Go to the ends of the earth for you, to make you feel my love. Sacrificed my only son for you, to make you feel my love. Welcome to the planet. Welcome to existence. Everyone's here. Everyone's here. Everybody's watching you now. Everybody waits for you now. What happens next? What happens next? I dare you to move. I dare you to move. I dare you to lift yourself up off the floor. I dare you to move. I dare you to move like today never happened. Today never happened before. Welcome to the fallout. Welcome to resistance. The tension is here. The tension is here between who you are and who you could be. Between how it is and how it should be. I dare you to move. I dare you to move. I dare you to lift up yourself off the floor. I dare you to move. I dare you to move like today never happened. Today never happened. Maybe redemption has fallen to earth. Maybe forgiveness is right where you stand. Where can you run to escape from yourself? Where you gonna go? Where you gonna go? Salvation is here. I dare you to move. I dare you to move. I dare you to lift up yourself off the floor. I dare you to move. I dare you to move like today never happened. Today never happened. Today never happened. Today never happened before. We pray for blessings, and we pray for peace. comfort for family, protection while we sleep. We pray for healing, for prosperity. We pray for your mighty hand to ease our suffering. And all the while, you hear each spoken need. Yet love is way too much to give us lesser things. 'Cause what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? And what if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? And what if trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? We pray for wisdom, your voice to hear. And we cry in anger when we cannot feel you near. We doubt your goodness, we doubt your love, as if every promise from your word is not enough. And all the while, you hear each desperate plea, and long that we have faith to believe. 'Cause what if your blessing comes through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? And what if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? And what if trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? When friends betray us, when darkness seems to win, we know the pain reminds this heart this is not our home. It's not our home. 'Cause what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? And what if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? What if my greatest disappointments or the aching of this life is a revealing of a greater thirst this world can't satisfy? And what if trials of this life, the rain, the storm, the hardest night, are your mercies in disguise? Pull the shades down on the sun. Don't want to see the morning break to another day I don't have the strength to face. Close the door and keep mistake is just too much for me to take. How do I begin to pray my way back to some kind of peace of mind? But then I hear love whispering through the darkest of times. You'll get through this. You'll break new ground. When you're lost within your weakness, hope is waiting to be found. You'll get through this. No matter what it takes, I believe in you for heaven's sake. You'll get through this. When doubt starts tearing at the faith deep in you, don't be afraid. Just remember what I said. Nothing formed against you will succeed. As long as your heart turns to me, you'll get through this. You'll break new ground. When you're lost within your weakness, hope is waiting to be found. You'll get through this. No matter what it takes, I believe in you for heaven's sake. You'll get through. Nothing formed against you will succeed. As long as your heart turns to me, you'll get through this. You'll break new ground. When you're lost within your weakness, hope is waiting to be found. You'll get through this. No matter what it takes, I believe in you for heaven's sake. You'll get through this. I searched for love till the night came and it closed in. I was alone till you found me where I was hiding. And now I'll never ever be the same. It was the sweetest voice that called my name, saying, you're not alone, for I am here. Let me wipe away your every fear. My love, I've never left your side. I have seen you through the darkest night. I'm the one who's loved you all your life. myself to sleep, 'cause the hurt is real and the pain cuts.
Hello. Good. Oh, I see more people coming in. I'm going to give them about 30 more seconds to move on up front and get some chairs, and then we'll get this event started. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for coming today, and I want to thank God for helping this all to come together. Today is Freedom Sunday. This Sunday, thousands of people from churches from across the United States and from around the world will unite for Freedom Sunday to worship, pray, lament, dance, raise awareness, and give in the direction of freedom. So today we're having our human trafficking awareness event. Because how can we ask people to help end an injustice if they're not aware that it's going on? Out in the entryway, we have Margot Ward and David Nolan from Hope Center. That's an aftercare for trafficked women. The Hope Center provides education, food, shelter, and mental health services to women who have been rescued from human trafficking. We also have Ascent 121, Kim Ratcliffe and Debbie Bora. Ascent 121 provides advocacy and recovery services for teen survivors of human trafficking in Indiana. Their services include residential and community-based clinical care. They are a faith-based agency. So afterwards, be sure to stop by their table and talk to them about their mission and get some of their literature. And our main event today is Tim Swarens. Tim is an opinion editor at the Indianapolis Star. He has started a long-term project to investigate child sex trafficking domestically and abroad. The series is planned for publication in January of 2018 across the USA Today network. Swarens' work will focus on how the demand side of trafficking creates a lucrative market for children to be sold millions of times a year. And so without further ado, let's welcome Tim Swarens. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much for taking time this morning to be here. And thank you especially to Leanne. Would you join me in giving a round of applause to Leanne? I was talking to Leanne just a few minutes ago, and it was clear that this issue has gripped her heart. She has a passion for the victims and survivors. And the same thing happened to me a few years ago when I met my first survivor. It's a woman named Nu, 12 years old when she was originally sold in Cambodia, in her home city of Phnom Penh. Today, Nu is a young wife in her 20s living in the United States. If you met Nu today, you would see a very happy and whole 25-year-old woman. And that's the hope that we have for Nu and for millions of children like Nu around the world and here in our own communities. I'm going to start with just a brief overview of the issue and what we're talking about, and I'm going to get into some specifics. And as Leanne said, my primary focus is on the demand side. I'm so glad to see so many men here. When I give these talks, it's usually 90% women. And this is an issue that women tend to be very passionate about, and that's great, but often men are not engaged in this conversation, and we desperately need men engaged in this conversation. And the reason is because while an overwhelming percentage of the victims and survivors are girls and women, the great majority of buyers are men. And what I've found is when men are talking to other men, there's a listening going on, right? They're more able to relate to one another. And we need men to be ambassadors on this issue, to catch the passion that Leanne has, to begin to understand what's happening around the world and in our communities. So the overview, just this past week, the United Nations released an updated estimate on the number of modern-day slaves in the world. 40 million people on any given day in 2016, according to the UN, are held in some sort of modern-day slavery. 40 million people. Most of those are in forced labor. They're working in fields, they're working in factories, they're working in the back of restaurants, doing a variety of labor that they're not being paid for. Or if they're being paid, it's such a small amount of money that it's more of an excuse to hold them, right? And a lot of indentured servants. We've had situations in our city where women have been brought in from Thailand and from China and being forced to work in massage parlors. They're charged $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for the privilege of coming to the United States to work in a massage parlor, and they have to work off that debt. It's a form of slavery because the debt is so deep, and they don't have a choice. A lot of times they're kept in those massage parlors. That's where they live, in not good conditions. So it's happening in our community to adults in large numbers. It's happening around the world in large numbers. I'm focused on child trafficking, and just a little bit of context on that. So of the 40 million people who are held in modern-day slavery, about 4.8 are held in sexual bondage, meaning that they are forced to work in the sex trade against their will. 4.8. Of that 4.8, more than 1 million are children. More than 1 million. The UN this past week said, we don't know exactly how many kids. It's a hidden crime. It's behind the scenes. We know there are at least 1 million, but in all likelihood, it's a much larger number than 1 million, but we can't determine how many. So 1 million kids around the world. Happens in Asia, it happens in Europe, it happens all over, but it happens here as well. In the United States, the average age of a child trafficking victim is 15. That's according to the U.S. Department of Justice. A study that was released last year of a survey of youth in the sex trade identified at least 10,000 kids who are sold in the sex trade in the United States each year, average age 15, and they are purchased on average 5.4 times a day. Think about that, 5.4 times a day. I've interviewed a 17-year-old survivor from our state who was trafficked in another state when she was 15. 150 men purchased her in 1 month. That's the average. She was purchased about 5 times a day. She was forced to work every day. She got 1 day off in the month. 150 men, that's average. That's happening to 10,000 children in our nation every year. That's 200,000 children in a generation. The trauma that these kids suffer is severe. It's not just what the men do. Almost all of these kids have suffered some sort of trauma before they even before they're brought into the sex trade. Traffickers are great. They have a special ability to identify the vulnerable. You and I walk into a room and we look around and we see, is there somebody I know? Is there somebody I might be able to strike up a conversation with? Pimps and traffickers walk in the room and say, who can I exploit? Who can I make money off of? I'll give you an example. 15-year-old girl in a small town in Illinois. She found out she was pregnant. She had an argument with her family about the fact that she was pregnant, and she ran away. She was on the streets by herself, and she was so depressed, feeling so hopeless, that she later told authorities that she was thinking about jumping off a bridge to end her life. The day that she was having those thoughts, she met a man named Michael Thompson. He was about 15 years older than her. And Michael Thompson was a pimp. He was a trafficker. She didn't know that when she met him. He struck up a conversation. He said, you're really pretty. I could make you a model. Why don't you come with me? I'll make you a model. And she was at a very low point, very vulnerable point in her life, so she got into the truck with him. And Michael and Robin Thompson then proceeded, Robin Thompson is Michael's wife, they proceeded to drive her around the southern United States for 6 weeks, summer of 2015. They sold her out of truck stops and motels. She finally ended up in a hospital in St. Louis. She was identified as a trafficking victim. So she was rescued. The police came in. She gave them a description of the Thompsons. The Thompsons were arrested. Michael Thompson's now serving a life sentence in federal prison. His wife, Robin, is serving 25 years in federal prison. The judge who sentenced them has been on the bench for more than 15 years. He said at the sentencing, this is one of the worst crimes I've ever seen. An experienced federal judge, you can imagine the types of cases he has seen. He said it's one of the worst I've ever seen. But I had a question about that case. And in many ways, the system worked very, very well in that case. The victim was identified and rescued and is now receiving help. The people who exploited her were arrested. They're now in federal prison for a very long time. So in many cases, the system worked really well. But I had a question about that case. What happened to the men who bought that wounded child? Not a single one was ever charged. They were allowed to go back to their families, back to their homes, back to their jobs, back to their communities. When I started my project, I started with a question: who buys a 15-year-old? Again, the average age of child victim in the United States, 15. Who buys a 15-year-old? And we have some things that obviously come into our mind. We have some stereotypes, right? They're guys hanging out in dark alleys in trench coats. They're the weird guys hanging out around children in parks. And that does happen, but that's not the norm. The research shows here and around the world that the average male who buys a child for sex is pretty much an otherwise ordinary guy. We see this in sting operations around the country. Police will pose as a child online, and then they see who will show up and they arrest them. And they're arresting all sorts of men in all sorts of walks of life. Teachers, pastors, doctors, lawyers, you name the profession, the guy's probably been caught trying to buy sex from a 14 or 15-year-old, an officer posing as a 14 or 15-year-old. So we can't stereotype these guys. The research is showing that in most cases, they don't set out to buy sex from an underage victim. That's not how it's advertised. You would be amazed, there are sites like Backpage.com, you would be amazed how many 19-year-old girls are working their way through college. That's what the ads say. Of course, they're not true. A lot of those 19-year-olds are 14 or 15 or 12. There was a 12-year-old victim, a case in Tennessee last year, 12-year-old advertised on Backpage. So they don't go there thinking they're going to buy that 12-year-old or that 15-year-old. That's not what they're telling themselves. But when they meet that victim, they don't turn around and walk out either. It kind of raised the question in my mind, do they know? Do they know those victims are underage? I asked a survivor named Tina Front, what she thought. Tina was trafficked as a child in Chicago and Cleveland. She's now an adult, and she runs a facility called Courtney's House for child trafficking victims in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And so I sat down with Tina, and I talked to her about buyers and her experiences. And I said, do the men know? And she said, yeah, they know. They know. If you talk to survivors tend to be pretty blunt. They don't shield things because of what they've experienced. She said, they know. She told me a story about a 13-year-old girl who had gone through her program. And what Tina said is the men invariably talk. They talk about their wives, they talk about their children, they talk about their jobs, they talk about what their interests are, their hobbies. And so she asked this 13-year-old, well, what did the men talk about with you? And she said, well, one of them asked me what my favorite TV show was. And Tina said, well, okay, what'd you tell him? She said, well, SpongeBob SquarePants. How many adults you know who watch SpongeBob SquarePants, right? This is a 13-year-old girl. That's maybe a little TV show, maybe a little bit young for her even. But any reasonable adult in that situation would say, hey, what's going on here? Your favorite show is SpongeBob? A survivor that I interviewed who was held in motel rooms in the Chicago suburbs said that she had only 2 men who entered the room, saw her, and said, you're too young, and they turned around and walked out. More than 100 men stayed. 2 walked out. When she first told me that, my initial reaction was, well, good for those 2 men. They did the right thing, and in a sense they did. But what did they not do? They didn't pick up the phone and say, hey, there's a child in this motel room being exploited, or at least I think it's a child. Would you go check it out? They were so worried about the questions that might be raised. How do you know that? That they went back to their lives and let that child continue to be exploited. And again, it's happening to 10,000 children a year in our nation, 1 million children a year around the world. And in talking to the survivors, it's both heartbreaking and inspiring. And I want to talk to you about a 61-year-old woman I interviewed in San Diego, California, who is first a recovering alcoholic, and then she got into heroin. And then she was on the streets. She was the only person I've ever talked to who said the police harassed me into saving my life. She was arrested 13 times. The 13th time she was in her early 30s. And she said, the 13th arrest saved my life because I was told that if I didn't get my act together, I was going to lose my son, and I couldn't lose my son. And so she went on a very hard journey to get clean and sober, to get her act together. And now at the age of 61, she's pouring her life into other victims and survivors. And what was so inspiring was that she will go into the jails and she'll talk to these young girls. She said, she at that point was working with a couple of girls in their early teens who had been in the sex trade for 5 years. And they were in juvenile detention. And she said, I've lost 5 years with them. It's so hard. But she's pouring her life into others like where she was, like herself. And at the age of 61, she's doing tremendous work, doing tremendous service. And my point here, number one, is we can't afford to write off people. She was in her early 30s. She was a heroin addict. She was on the street. She'd been arrested 12 times. And I think most people, maybe even myself, would have said it's a hopeless case. It's bad, it's a shame, but what can we do? Well, the police arrested her for the 13th time. And somebody cared enough about her to say, you've got to get your act together. And she did. And she's making a tremendous difference in others' lives today, 30 years later. We can't afford to write off people. That's true when they're 30, and it's certainly true when they're 15. So the sad reality is, when a 15-year-old suffers the type of trauma that these children suffer, it causes a lot of damage. We all know that, of course. But when they act out on that trauma, we tend to write them off. That's a troubled kid. What can we do? When they're 15, 16, 17. And it gets even we tend to write them off even more when they're over the age of 18. And what that woman in San Diego taught me is we can't write them off. It may take a lifetime, but we still have to stay engaged. And so that's why I'm glad the Hope Center is here. I'm glad Ascent 121 is here. If you're asking yourself, what can I do to get involved? Go talk to those folks out there because they're active in our community. And the need here in our community is tremendous. I've been talking to local providers in recent weeks. They're seeing a significant increase in the number of kids that they're helping, kids from here in central Indiana. So they're seeing increased numbers. The good news on that is that they attribute that largely to increased awareness, better training, and increased awareness. So the number of victims isn't necessarily increasing. We're doing a better job of identifying those kids and getting them help. But there's still an awful lot of kids out there who suffer this horrific trauma and they're never identified. And can you imagine going back to your life or trying to make a life after 150 minutes a month and you're not receiving any assistance, any help, no counseling? And that actually is true for the majority of the kids. They're not identified. So we are doing a better job. There is hope. We're doing a better job of identifying those victims and getting them services and programs like Ascent 21 and for adults, survivors, Hope Center. They're doing important work in our community. And the good news is there are lots of those types of providers here in central Indiana and around the country and around the world. But the need is tremendous. And so my work is primarily focused on the demand side. And the demand is huge. When I thought I knew something about this issue when I started more than a year ago. I'd been involved as a volunteer. I'd actually written a little bit about the issue or the set of issues. And when I started on this, I thought I knew something. I quickly realized, like Jon Snow, I knew nothing. And I was kind of taken aback when I realized the scope of the demand. I'll give you one example from here in central Indiana. I talked to an undercover police officer just a couple of weeks ago. He works in a county in Indiana, fewer than 100,000 people in the county. He and a partner were seeing so many trafficking victims, underage trafficking victims, that they went to the sheriff and they said, we've got to do something about this. They were undercover officers primarily responsible for the drug trade, but they said, we're seeing so many underage girls who are being trafficked, we've got to do something. The sheriff said, yes, do it. So in really their spare time, in between drug cases, they're trying to address this issue in their county. And so this officer, who's burly man with a beard in his 30s, he posed as a 15-year-old girl online, placed a fake ad on Backpage, and he told me that within 12 hours had 98 responses. I've heard the same thing all over the country. To the point where law enforcement's learned they have to have their act together before they post the ad. Because the minute they post an ad, the responses start coming in. And you have to be able to trap that data, collect those phone numbers immediately. The demand is enormous. I think you can see that with the types of numbers. 150 men, 5 a day on average, 150 in a month, 98 responses in 12 hours. The demand is enormous. And the most important fundamental thing to understand about the sex trade is it's a business. So the United Nations estimates that modern day slavery accounts for $150 billion a year in revenue and $99 billion, so 2/3 of that revenue comes from the sex trade. And about 20% of it comes from the commercial exploitation of children. So we're talking about $21 billion a year in revenue. That's equivalent to almost equivalent to the annual revenue of Eli Lilly, to give you some context. So it's a lot of money, and it's tax-free. One of the things I didn't quite understand was why traffickers, why pimps went after kids, went after the 15-year-old to exploit. Because we actually have very strong laws in place to protect these kids. If I'm a pimp, I'm a trafficker, and I get caught trying to sell a 15-year-old, if I'm convicted in federal court, I'm facing a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. And it's obviously much easier to prove that somebody is 15 and therefore automatically a victim of human trafficking under federal law. Easier to prove that for that 15-year-old than a 25-year-old. So, not knowing a whole lot about it, I said, well, why wouldn't, if you're going to be in this business, why wouldn't you exploit a 25-year-old and protect yourself rather than a 15-year-old? And what the research is showing is that the pimps look at it as a way to, how can I maximize my profit? And it's easier to control a 15-year-old than a 25-year-old. 17-year-old survivor I interviewed, she didn't get any money. The guy bought her fast food, he would buy her some clothes, he would buy her drugs. And she was at a point in her life at that time where she said, I didn't deserve any better than that. She believed all the horrible things that people had said to her. She internalized it. And she could be placated pretty easily. She was easy to control. And she didn't ask for much of the money. She didn't ask for a cut of the profits. So the pimps can maximize their profits with underage kids. And the reality is, if they do get caught, they're facing significant penalty, but most of them never get caught. I was at Interpol in France in May working on the project. The head of their Crimes Against Children unit said, this is a low-risk crime. It's true for pimps, traffickers, it's true for buyers. It's a low-risk crime. They just, most times, don't get caught. I told you about the 15-year-old from Illinois sold for 6 weeks. None of the buyers got caught. Low risk. And that's true in case after case after case. So how do we begin to confront the demand side? Well, we've got to hold men accountable. And it can be done. One of the cases I'm looking at is a guy named Richard Purnell. Richard owned a small roofing company in Parma, Ohio. It's a suburb of Cleveland. Richard's 55 years old, and he was repeatedly buying 14-year-olds. He had one 14-year-old girl in particular that he bought on many occasions, including at one time when he went and picked her up from her foster home. She wasn't the only one he exploited, but the case against him was built on that 14-year-old. The 14-year-old was identified by the FBI. She was rescued. And in looking through her phone, they found a particular phone number that turned up over and over again. They found the text conversations. And they said, there's something going on here that's really bad. And so they, again, ran a sting operation designed specifically for one person. And Richard took the bait. And he's now facing 17 years in federal prison for exploiting that 14-year-old. So it can be done. It can be done because almost all these transactions are taking place through cell phone conversations and through text messages. So there are phone records. But Richard is the exception. And I'm not saying that we need to send guys away for 17 years. I don't think we can do that because we're talking about so many men. But we have to find a medium between 17 years and nothing. 17 years and going back to my wife and children, going back to my job until the next time. The sociologists I talk to say they call it the culture of impunity. And what do they mean by that? It means as a society, we make distinctions. A teacher who sexually abuses a child in the classroom, we are justifiably outraged by that, and we bring the full force of the law against that person, as we should. The teacher who buys a child online through Backpage gets away with it. Even if the child is identified and rescued, even if the pimp is arrested, the buyers, in almost all cases, are never prosecuted. And so we've got a problem because it's a business. And if you don't address the demand side of a business, you're not going to change anything. I want to open this up. If you have some questions, we've got a few more minutes, happy to answer any questions you might have.
If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone. Wish it would have been closer.
Oh, sorry.
Is it on? Is it on?
Yeah.
Can you stand, please? Sure.
Why are these websites like Backpage, why is it so difficult to shut those down? They're so obvious, they're so out there,
Yeah.
and yet they just
Great
continue,
question.
continue.
Yeah. Great question. A lot of people have asked that question. A lot of people have tried to shut them down, including law enforcement, state attorneys general. Backpage is allowed to continue to operate because of what's called the Federal Decency Act, incredibly enough. But that's what it's called. And what that does is it protects internet providers, because if you operate a website and somebody posts content on your site that you didn't generate, it protects you legally from liability. So I'll use IndyStar as an example, right? We allow comments on our stories. Readers can go on our stories and post comments about, we hope, about the story, about something they've read. The standard for publishers has been, as long as we don't go in and edit those comments, we're not liable for those comments. Now, we can take them off and in their entirety if they cross the line, but we don't go in and edit those comments, so therefore we don't legally own them. The reason why that law was put in place was because in the online world, in its anonymity, you can have somebody come on your site and post something and you don't know it for a little while. There's a delay before you're aware of it. And so the idea was to protect the communications industry from liability, and the liability would shut down legitimate conversations. The Backpage owners have exploited that, to be honest. What they say is, we're just hosting those ads, we're not responsible for them, and we're legally not liable because somebody's paying to post it on our site, but we're not generating the content ourselves. And the courts have bought that argument for the most part. Now, the reality is that anybody with any, I mean, it's so obvious what's going on, right? And you just have to read the ads, you see the photos. it's pretty obvious what's happening. Yeah.
So since the people who are using Backpage then, and that's just so obvious, where is the law enforcement or investigation on those ads?
Well, so there are a couple things going on. So there have been children rescued because law enforcement, they've gone through the ads and they say that's really suspicious, and they'll track down those kids. And so there are a number of kids who've been rescued because the ad, how it was worded, or perhaps some of the photographs that were included, where they were very suspicious that, the police were very suspicious that this was a child who was being exploited. There are other cases where law enforcement will post fake ads, as I said earlier, and they will then use sting operations to catch buyers. So law enforcement, in most jurisdictions, law enforcement, they're going through those ads, they're searching them. But the reality is, I mean, the pimps aren't, thank you, we have 5 minutes left. Pimps aren't dumb. They're not going to put an ad on there saying, hey, she's 15. No, they say she's 19 and she's working her way through college. Why working your way through college? You talk to the buyers, the lies they tell themselves are pretty amazing. I've actually had men who said, you know, she was working her way through college. I was helping her. I was helping her with her education. I've all talked to other men who insist, although they've been sex buyers for a long time, they insist. I've never purchased anybody who was a trafficking victim. Kind of insulted that you imply that they've exploited somebody. They're very self-righteous about it. No, they wanted to be there. They wanted the money. It's a lie that they tell themselves. Here's the reality. This is why it's so important for men to be a part of this conversation. If you're buying sex, there's a good chance that you're helping to exploit a trafficking victim. Now, I'm not saying that every person working in the sex trade is a victim of human trafficking. What I'm saying is that if you're buying sex, the odds are that you may very well be exploiting somebody. The reason why I say that, a study out of San Diego County released last year, looked at first-time arrestees for prostitution. More than 50% of them were trafficking victims at the time of arrest or had been trafficking victims. So San Diego County, California, more than half of the girls and women arrested for the first time were trafficking victims or had been trafficking victims at some point in their life. The National Study of Youth in the Sex Trade, which included young adults up to age 24, found that 80% of the youth they surveyed were trafficking victims or had been trafficking victims at some point in their life. They interviewed 13 to 24-year-olds. So 80% in that age range. And so it's a 20-year-old who is sold on Backpage may be a trafficking victim or may not be. But the odds are that she is. So if you're buying sex and you tell yourself, I'm not exploiting a trafficking victim, you're telling yourself a lie. Because the good chance is at some point, if you do this more than once, you're going to be exploiting somebody. So it's really important to get that message out. Because again, the guys tell themselves, I'm helping, I'm not exploiting, and the reality is, there's a good chance they are exploiting.
We have a few more questions.
Yeah, okay.
I just wondered if there are organizations, it seems like a lot of this would take place around events and hotels and service industries, and I wondered if there are organizations out there to kind of help train people who are in those industries how to spot it, how to recognize it, and speaking with businessmen and things like that. Are there people who are going out and doing that kind of?
Good question. So Hilton Hotels has trained, I think, all of its employees. There's some other hotel chains that have done the same. Carlton Hotels is based in Minnesota. They have invested in this issue in a very big way. I think Delta Airlines has done a lot of training with its flight crews and with others that it employs to help be able to spot trafficking victims. I was at a conference in DC just a couple of weeks ago, talked to the head of the UPS Foundation. UPS has trained all of its employees, including its drivers, to spot trafficking victims. There's an organization called Truckers Against Trafficking that trains truckers to spot trafficking victims, because truck stops are a big place for exploitation to happen, and so they've trained truckers to be able to spot trafficking victims. So there's a lot of training going on. It's why on the good side we're identifying more victims. Is the identification and training has improved a lot. Did I? One more. Okay.
Oh, she was next.
Okay. And I will stay, if you went to first service and you want to stay and ask questions, I'll be down here, come up and ask me. I don't want you to skip second service. I'll be in trouble. Please go to second service if you haven't been to service yet. But if you've been to first service and you want to stay and ask questions, I'll stay down here and as long as you want to ask questions.
I just had a question. I noticed when you were talking that you interchanged trafficker with pimp.
Yeah.
And I noticed that my own response to the idea of pimp or prostitution is really different than to a victim of trafficking versus prostitution, kind of the language around it.
Yeah, and that's important. And the reason why I use pimp and trafficker interchangeably, I've talked to survivors who don't like the trafficking word, and they said, no, it's a pimp. And the reason why, one survivor said that trafficking is a government word. We never use that word on the street. And she thought that it sanitized what's going on a little more. Now, I do draw the line on prostitution. I try to be very, very, very careful. I hope I didn't use the prostitution word today in referring to children. There is no such thing. Nothing else from this today. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. Okay? You'll see that occasionally. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. That child is a sexual abuse victim. It's really, really important that we begin to understand that as a culture. I get on my soapbox on this one. We're running out of time, so I won't tell you the Lolita story. But honestly, the angriest I got when I was working on this project is when I began doing research on the story of Lolita, if you're familiar with it. Lolita was a 12-year-old sexual abuse victim, and she's fictional. It was a 1955 novel that shocked the United States because it told the story of child sex abuse through the eyes of the stepfather who abused 12-year-old Dolores. Dolores was her real name. Her abuser gave her the nickname Lolita. The name Dolores has been lost to history. Most people today know the word Lolita because it's been made into movies and musicals, and there you can buy all sorts of Lolita products online. But a 12-year-old sexual abuse victim in a novel in 1955. By 1959, Merriam-Webster defined the word Lolita as a sexually precocious child. That's the definition of Lolita today. The 12-year-old abuse victim had become a temptress. Our culture did that.
If you're going to the 11 o'clock service, this is your cue to get up and walk out. But before you do, if he touched your heart or made you mad, as a minimum, write down the Human Trafficking National Hotline, and if you see something, call it. And on the back is indicators. Know them. And if you have a computer, you can Google it and educate yourself.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
All hope seems lost. With heartache, your closest friend, and everyone's long gone. You've had to face the music on your own. But there is a sweeter song that calls you home, saying you're not alone, for I am here. Let me wipe away your every fear. My love, I've never left your side. I have seen you through the darkest night, and I'm the one who's loved you all your life, all of your life, faithful and true forever. My love will carry you. You're not alone, for I am here. Let me wipe away your every fear. My love, I've never left your side. I have seen you through the darkest night, and I'm the one who's loved you all your life, all your life. I've been walking the razor's edge. I cut my feet again. And now I can't stand on my own. I wish that I could be the truth you are to me, but I've been cold as a stone. And even though I lost my way, you still got an open hand to hold. I really can't go on acting this way.